My least expensive month in 7 years of tracking my spending wasn't in Bali. It wasn't in Thailand either. It was in Lagos, Nigeria. And my second cheapest month was in Buenos Aires, which is not what most nomad content would tell you. There's a gap between the countries people recommend for digital nomads and the ones that actually end up being the easiest and most affordable to live in. And after 12 years of living this way across 130 countries, this gap shows up more consistently than you might think. But before getting deeper into specific countries, it's helpful to understand why this gap exists. Most recommendations are based on 3 primary things: what used to be true a few years ago, what gets talked about the most online, and what looks cheap on a daily basis. But when you're actually living somewhere for a month or longer, a different set of factors starts to matter. How reliable the internet is, how easy it is to find a good apartment at whatever your standard level of comfort is, how much effort basic things take, like getting around, paying for things, and communicating, and how those costs and frictions add up over time. I track all of my expenses, so this isn't based on estimates. These are real numbers from actual months in each place. And once you look at it that way, some of the most recommended places and unrecommended places start to look a little bit different. In Lagos, Nigeria, which is not a place you'll see on most best digital nomad destinations lists, my total spend for the month was about $1,500. That included accommodation, transportation, food, and all other day-to-day expenses. And what kept that number low wasn't that Lagos is easy to navigate. It isn't, particularly. It's that the specific things that can easily inflate a nomad budget elsewhere weren't there in the same way. In places like Bali or Bangkok, there's a whole infrastructure built up around you. Cheap massages, co-working day passes, rooftop drinks with old friends or new ones you just met, a good medical system that makes you think, why not get that checkup done now while it's affordable? None of those are bad decisions, especially individually, but they can add up to several $100s a month or more that you didn't really plan for. Lagos doesn't have that pull in the same way. Culturally, there's a huge amount happening, but the expat spending layer that exists in more established nomad hubs just isn't there. So the budget stays contained almost by default. Bali is one of the clearest examples of this contrast. And to be clear, I like Bali. I'd go back. But the version of Bali that gets recommended is not the version you arrive into now. Accommodation is more expensive than people expect. The best places get booked early, and what's left closer to your arrival is often more expensive and lower quality. It's also not particularly walkable. You're either on a scooter or relying on Grab for almost everything, and sitting in traffic, which adds both cost and friction to your day. And because everything looks cheap individually, it's easy to overspend without realizing it. More meals out, more activities, more small decisions that don't feel expensive in the moment, but add up over the month. So while Bali still works, you have to be intentional about how you spend your time there. Showing up and expecting it to be an effortless, low-cost base doesn't really match reality anymore. Thailand is similar, but in a more nuanced way. Bangkok fully lives up to its reputation. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. Food is excellent, transportation is easy, though there is a lot of traffic. Internet is strong. Cost relative to quality is hard to beat. But the beach and island circuit is a different story. Places like Phuket feel much more like vacation destinations than places you'd want to base yourself for work. Koh Tao has a strong party atmosphere, which is great for a short stay, but not ideal if you're trying to be productive. And this is where the recommendation breaks down. People say, go to Thailand. But Thailand is huge and diverse, and the places that work best for remote work are not always the places getting the most attention. Another pattern that surprises people is in Europe. There's an assumption that Europe automatically means strong infrastructure, especially when it comes to internet. But in practice, that hasn't consistently been true in my experience. Across a lot of Europe, both speeds and connection stability have been lower than I've had across most of Asia and even Africa, where I've also been able to access data through cell service at significantly lower prices. It's not a deal breaker, but it is a friction point that doesn't get mentioned as often as it maybe should, and one you only really notice if you're trying to work full-time from somewhere. Bansko Bulgaria is one of the exceptions, which is why I keep going back there. Jordan doesn't get recommended enough for this lifestyle, but it absolutely should be. Most people think of it as a tourist destination. Petra, Wadi Rum, the Dead Sea. But for a place to live and work for a few weeks or a couple of months, it's surprisingly easy. Accommodation is realistically in the $30 to $60 per night range for good options. Meals can be $3 to $4 and are consistently good. People are extremely friendly and welcoming. Visa process is straightforward, especially if you're using the Jordan Pass. It starts at 70 Jordanian dinar and covers both entry and access to major tourist sites. Internet is generally reliable enough to work without constantly thinking about backups, and there's really good cafe culture in Amman. Day-to-day life is just manageable. It's one of those places where nothing felt unnecessarily difficult to me, and I can easily imagine spending more time. Argentina is another one where reputation hasn't really caught up to reality, but it's a bit more layered. For a long time, people avoided it because of the economic complexity. That's eased significantly now. But now the conversation has shifted. I hear people avoiding it for an adjacent reason: that prices have gotten too high. In February 2025, I spent just $1,835 for the entire month living in Buenos Aires. Going in, I was expecting it to be much more expensive than that based on what I had heard people saying. It still ended up being my second cheapest single destination month in 7 years of tracking my spending data. So the reputation is running a bit behind in both directions. First, it was seen as too complicated, now as too expensive. And neither really reflects what I found during my visits there. Buenos Aires specifically is also much more English-friendly than many people assume, though that friction point does exist in other parts of the country, which is absolutely worth exploring. Bulgaria is less of a surprise and more of a confirmation at this point. I'm heading back to Bansko for my 5th summer this year, which probably says more than any other data point could. The apartment Kevin and I share comes out to €460 per month, so €230 each. My total monthly spend varies more than in most places, but it's still relatively low, usually between $1,000 and $2,000. And that really comes down to how much I'm leaning into the social scene and how much Bulgarian wine is involved. But the floor is low and the value is consistent. What keeps me coming back isn't novelty, it's that everything works. Fast internet, a strong community, and day-to-day life that doesn't require much effort. For Europe, that combination at that price point is genuinely hard to find. There's one part of this that's harder to put in a spreadsheet, and that's the cost of choosing what actually makes your day-to-day life better. There have been months where I could have spent less than $1,500 if I optimized everything for cost alone. But I chose an apartment that was more expensive because it had better light, more space, and a setup that made working easier. That difference shows up directly in the numbers. And I still think it was the right decision, because when you're working every day, those details might matter more than saving a few $100. This is the part that tends to get left out of most Nomad advice. For me, the goal was never to find the cheapest possible version of this lifestyle. It's to understand where the costs actually come from so I can decide what's worth it. Sometimes that means spending more on accommodation. Sometimes it means going somewhere that isn't the cheapest option. And sometimes it means slowing down when everything around you is pushing you to keep moving. The friction never really goes away. You just get clearer about which parts are actually worth it for you. If you're trying to figure out what this lifestyle actually looks like in practice, I've linked my full financial toolkit in the description. The tools I actually use to track spending and manage money across countries. And if you want more videos that break down the real numbers behind this lifestyle, hit subscribe.